Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Phase, an Adventures in Middle-earth podcast. I'm Josh and that's Callum. We're going to give you inside information on how to find your own path through Tolkien's world.
Men have dwelt in Wilderland since the first age of the world. They lived then much as they do now, in small clans, ruled by chieftains and warlords, living mostly among the eaves of the forest. But there has been a time when a Northman prince dared to proclaim themselves the king of all Wilderland. Mere memories exist of this time. The Northmen build no great cities, but this king once ruled of the wide plains between the forest and the river running, and the barren expanse called the East Bight was carved out by the hunger for wood of his many subjects.
Well, hello there.
Greetings. I decided to be controversial.
I'm not sure if I'm willing to accept this new form of pleasantry. Let's go with it because you're essential to this podcast, but Callum and I are going to have to discuss after this whether greetings is an acceptable way in.
I think it probably is, given that one of the titles of the chapters of the book is Many Greetings, isn't it?
Many meetings.
Oh, I'm out.
Am I in charge of the podcast now? Is that how it works?
Yeah, there's going to be a change on the Council of Elrond. Callum's out, James is
There's
in.
gonna,
You
like,
can
in
say
Monty
greetings as
Python.
much.
And I'll just get thrown off the bridge.
What's your throwing off the bridge noise, Callum?
No!
Excellent work.
Oh, you kill your family. You throw you under a bridge.
So we talked last time about the history of the Kingdom of Rhovanion, a kingdom of men in the north, and its links to Gondor, the kin strife, and all the rich history. And we teased that this time we would talk about how we would implement that into a game of Adventures in Middle-earth or Lord of the Rings role-playing game. So we can throw to Josh here because on a previous episode, quite an early episode, we talked about your character, Josh, Halmir, Captain
Yes.
Gondor. And
Yes.
he had a mission quest type thing, did he not?
He did. And this is something that we talked about in character creation. And something I really, as someone who's DM'd a lot and was creating a character midway through your campaign, although we've now played for so long that it was actually quite early in the campaign. It felt midway through the campaign. I wanted to make sure there were some hooks in my backstory that would allow you to introduce Halmir into the story, but without me forcing the plot to go a particular way, because I thought if I come up with a really rigid backstory and then you think, oh, that doesn't make any sense with everything we're going to do, that would be cool. So I thought, what's good, open-ended, had that my uncle Baranor was missing, and he was missing with a family heirloom, Gilfilus, which is the family sword. So Halmir had a Gondorian man from Dol Amroth. He'd gone off to fight in the army. His commission effectively finished. He returns home to Dol Amroth to see his uncle, who's his like mentor, his kind of true father figure. He's vanished with the sword. Halmir sets out north to trace his footsteps. We talked about it as part of character creation. So you had the sword, you had Baranor, the questions of where have they gone? Why must be something of some significance here. And my kind of main driving mission for Halmir was to just follow these breadcrumbs as and when they might be presented, which I hoped meant that you'd be able to weave it into the plot without throwing off all the other characters. What I didn't know, and I mentioned this on our Rhovanion episode last time, I didn't know a huge amount of the lore of the kin strife or anything like that. So I learned about it at the same time as playing the game and interacting with those elements, which was excellent.
Which kind of makes sense for your character, who was less of a bookworm Maybe if you'd been a scholar, maybe you would have known those links, who knows? But that was a gift. But it's like instantly, like, why would a man have gone? I think that's one of the inherent challenges in Lord of the Rings role playing, is that on one hand, you want people to have a lot of choice in character creation. You don't want it to be like, you are all men of Dale. That's unless you're doing a set thing. At the moment, we're doing some games which are like dwarf themes. So I think it's fair enough to say you're all dwarfs, or if you're playing the Shire, you're all hobbits. But if people were like, create a man of Gondor, and they're in the Woodlands, why are they there? And so I think that's a really important question to get with your players. And I don't think it's enough to just say they're adventuring, because there's plenty of stuff that he's done
Yeah.
closer to home. So this is a great hook for me. Because immediately, okay, I don't actually have to answer the question of why Halmir's there. I have to answer the question of why Baranor, his uncle, is there. And then I get to be like, why is Baranor there? What's the interesting thing? What would drive someone from Gondor to come? Here we go. The history of Rhovanion and the kin strife, the links between Gondor. Here we go. I'm going to explore this. We're on a roll. It's great. I'm excited.
It really is one of my fondest memories of the campaign. Is just the period where we were back in the Dalelands and on Baranor's trail in that part of the world.
Yeah.
And it really did have a slight Indiana Jonesy vibe of we're uncovering some history, we're putting the pieces together, we're on the trail, we don't know how far behind we are, and then there is another faction we're racing against to some degree. We don't really know a lot about them. So there's just a lot of good mystery. But I think an important lesson here, though, is that it combines that history with some personal stakes. So if we're talking about running a game and what makes storylines compelling, the fact that, yes, we're uncovering history, that is fun, that is interesting. But also for Baranor, for Halmir, it is personally important to find Baranor.
Yes.
I just think that the dovetailing of those two elements is good.
Yeah, because suddenly you're like, if I just dump a little lore and you'd be like, there was this thing called the kinstripe, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's, why do we care? James would care. But, maybe your players wouldn't. They probably will, because we're all nerds, aren't we? So maybe to talk through this quest, because I think we did actually, basically, I put in all the lore that there was about the Kingdom of Rhovanion into the game through this medium. And I think there's other ways you could approach this for the players. But maybe this is a more organic one, because I guess from a lore master perspective, prepping this is quite straightforward. All I had to say was, what was Baranor's motivations to go north, and where did he go, when, and what did he do? And that's not that hard to prep, really. And then it means that when you're interacting with people, the NPCs might know some parts of the story, but not all, and that makes it a bit of a mystery and can sometimes be a bit confusing for players. But ultimately, I think ended up, I hope, in a series of adventures where it wasn't entirely clear from the beginning where it was leading. So, Josh, maybe you can lead us in the conversation of the story of Halmir following the trail of Baranor, and I can fill in the sort of where the lore was behind it.
So, before actually joining the campaign, Halmir had moved north. He'd been to Minas Tirith and then effectively followed the trail up the Anduin, Andros, where he served as a soldier, further up towards Lorien. He had some kind of knowledge, not a huge amount, and he had some suspicions about where Baranor would go. He had a vague sense that maybe the elves, now Dol Amroth as a city has a lot of connections with the elves, and his lineage is slightly tied in with that, and he speaks Sindarin. He thought, oh, maybe he could visit Lorien and he would get answers from the elves. That was a non-starter, because you can't just drop in to see the elves at Lorien. He ends up at the Gladden Fields, moving north, and he's captured by the orcs who were there at the time when our existing party was effectively finishing that quest. That's how he was introduced into the campaign. He was rescued as an unconscious NPC who, when he recovered with Theodric, transitioned over. So he basically traveled north, had some adventures on the way, and the trope was very much, he is a fish out of water in the north. He is a very different area to what he's used to. The peoples are very different. For him, it's like truly wild.
And he doesn't get along with dwarves.
He doesn't really know dwarves. He doesn't get along with them. And probably our first quest was to cross Mirkwood from west to east with Boffrey the dwarf, who was looking to reinstate the Old Forest Road. He did not like Boffrey. He didn't get on with. They just didn't gel at all. He didn't really get dwarvish kind of culture. They clashed quite a lot. I'm trying to think when the first kind of really important kind of breadcrumb was. He'd had rumors all along, and you did a really good job of weaving in. Sometimes the rumors were very vague, and it would be like, "Oh, a man of," well, something that you and I worked on to make it a helpful quest to pursue, and also to add a bit of intrigue, was that Baranor looks very like Halmir. So that was a starting point. Was, have you seen someone similar to me? Much paler skin and darker hair, even bone structure similar to his uncle. And so I would ask a lot of NPCs, have you seen a man who looks like me, who would be quite unusual for these parts? And you did a good job of being quite vague. Oh, there were rumors of an unusual man in black traveling in this direction, which could have meant a whole myriad of things, good and bad. But it was good because it gave us as a group things like, oh, that might be a breadcrumb to follow. We end up through the east at Esgaroth and at Dale, and learnt a bit more from Bard, where we actually managed to nail down that Baranor had visited Dale and had spoken to Bard and had snuck into Erebor to speak to Dane. Those were important steps. We knew exactly when they had happened, and I think as a party we knew that meant that gave us a sense of the motivation as well. This was someone who travelled north and had met two of the most senior significant figures. He'd either come to get something or to deliver something, some kind of communication. So that was probably the
Also
first.
Brings us to the stone block.
Yes, I wanted to lead towards the stone block. So we've got Halmir, fish out of water, doesn't really get. He'd been in the army his entire life, and he had a very ordered view of like how things worked. He grew up in a kind of metropolitan city. He was reasonably worldly, but being in the north, he was fish out of water, no idea what's going on. He was very reliant on the party to say, this is how you interact with dwarves, with Bjornings, with woodmen, and also speaking to some kind NPCs. Now, we were able to speak to Bard. We got an audience with him, and Halmir impressed him on a hunt with his son, and Halmir actually helped his son in some archery to kill a stag. And that was enough for Bard, I think, to give a bit of information that Baranor had visited, and he brought worrying tidings from the south and pleas for the steward of Gondor and Turgon and Bard to be in communication. So we knew that Baranor's quest was being driven at a really high level. It was the steward had basically given him a mission to go forth from. We knew it was some significance. I, as Halmir, was like, oh, we'll now obviously just go into Erebor and speak to Dane. Clearly, that's just the next step of this quest. And Halmir thought that. I, as a player, knew that wasn't just the thing we could do. But Halmir was like, we'll just go, we'll get an audience with Dane, he'll tell us the answer, tick the box, we'll catch up with Baranor. And you were all like, no, that's not. We can't just walk into Erebor, like they're quite an isolationist society anyway, but you're not just going to get an audience with Dane. So we'd been like, what can we do to impress? And I can't remember whether it was an NPC or someone in the party, but someone was like, the dwarves respect materials, quality, stone, material things, artisan craft. It was like, if you could acquire some marble, it would be as a gift. You could gift a piece of marble to Dane. Would be in mechanics terms, a successful traditions check of recognizing what this person sees as important. I cannot remember where I acquired it from, but I spent all my money on an absolutely massive piece of, I think it was marble. And in my head, I was like,
sitting in Runin's shop.
I was like, I'm going to pay for this. This is it. I'm going to find a way to get an audience with Dane, and I will give it as a gift, and hopefully we'll bond, and he'll be able to give me a bit about Baranor, and we'll be able to pick up the trail. That's the next step. For one reason or another,
It never came up.
It never came up. I think it's because we went to the Library of Mazrabul, and we actually learned a lot of information. We found out that Baranor had actually snuck into the library to do some research. And I remember it being a really great session that you led us through, Callum, because we knew Baranor had been in the library, and we thought he needs information from in here. If we can find the same information he was looking for, it will set us on like where he goes next. And we had loads of great investigation checks. Torwald, James, you as a character who basically grew up in a building and living in a library. We did a whole. Do you remember that session where we researched and we were trying to figure out bits of lore? And Callum, you dropped in so much lore in that session. How did you prep for that?
Oh, that's a good question. That was a
Long
long
ago now.
time ago.
Maybe it was that you'd already prepped all of that lore, but like you were talking us through, we'd be looking through books and we rolled really high, and I think we'd maybe found some dusty books, some of which had recently been disturbed, which had helped us isolate particular books that you might have been looking at. You did throw in some kind of red herrings, but we learned a lot about the kingdom of Rhovanion and the settlement of Velbovny, which was in the East Bight, so further down the eastern eaves of Mirkwood.
So sorry, Josh. One of the things we didn't touch on last time, but it is something that Tolkien notes, is that there is this big chunk carved out of Mirkwood on, if you look at the map of Rhovanion. And he does say that was largely due to deforestation caused by the Kingdom of Rhovanion, which clearly means that they were building something.
Yeah.
Yeah, they must have cut down a lot of wood to make that sizable chunk of area taken out. I think what I did was I prepped. I knew that he'd been in there and he must have found out details. And so basically I had to make notes on what information you could find and then had DCs about what information you could get. And I guess a lot of these things when you prep it, you never know how quickly people are going to find the clues. Like ultimately, I needed you to go to the next breadcrumb.
Yes.
So basically, it was like we'd drop in a little bit, and then if you guys would be like, "Oh, we're still not sure what we're meant to do, what's the plan?"
Doesn't sound like us.
Drop in a bit more information, and then just keep dropping in things and making it clearer in different ways, and improving how that was written in the books. I wouldn't have the books written down and prepped; it wouldn't be as set as that. But essentially, what I was getting across was that, and I guess Baranor had come north because there was something that they needed, something that had been in Gondor, that had gone north with Eldacar, and he'd been sent to retrieve. But he didn't know where it was, nor did anybody else. So he was up north to try and find out where this thing was, where it was held, and bring it back, which is quite a vague hook in a way, but also it gives you the thing, okay, where would you find out? You go to these major NPCs, alliances, and then in the records here, it's the dwarfs would have records. They've been around for ages. They would have records of the history of Rhovanion, wouldn't they? They would at least know where their settlements might have been. And then the next breadcrumb was, okay, Baranor went to the ruins of what was the capital city of the Kingdom of Rhovanion, which we've lost to time, but I was like, it's going to begin with a V. Let's call it Velbovny. I can't remember exactly what. I think I did some reading about Gothic names and like use some like name generator stuff. And that's where the next breadcrumb led us to, because I was like, there must be some archaeological records of these people, and it's probably somewhere near the East Bight, which James says is it something that's attributed to that group of people, probably.
Two things I wanted to say that I think work really well. Again, I'm just framing one of the things we've already said, which is just the fact that we were following Baranor meant, I think it gave us a sort of, even though it was vague, it gave us this confidence of there is something to find here.
Yes.
You know, which as players, when there is, and I had this problem. I had this problem recently when I was running this new campaign with friends here in Winchester, and I did try to give them each a specific character-based reason why they were doing what they were doing in the first adventure, but they didn't have a reason as a group working together to do it, which is a lesson learned. But having that sense of there needs to be a reason why this group of characters is working together to do this thing, and the presence of Baranor, even in his absence, so to speak, gave us that focus.
Yeah.
The other thing is how these different groups in the world interact with each other was also very well deployed. Because as you said, it makes complete sense that the dwarves would have records that go back that far. It also makes sense that those records would be very limited.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be a lot of information there, just the barest sense of some trade route or some agreement that was made for something that directed us in a particular way. But there's not going to be like the dwarves were not going to have the minutes of the Rhovanion council meetings.
Yeah. I'm in characters Helmium. All the notes I have from our campaign are written as notes that character would take in his journal, because in my head canon, Helmir is presuming his uncle, and he keeps notes of his own progress to go along. So those are the notes I've taken. I know those are quite different from some people's session notes, which kind of cover everything that happens in the session. If Halmir is not there, or it's not relevant to his pursuit of Baranor, I've not got notes, but I have very detailed notes of these things. So I've got the notes up about our time in the Chamber of Miserable. The books that you highlighted to us that we found, which were less dusty, were the History of the River Running. So that's helpful to give us our first kind of data point on the graph. The other one was the History of Rhovanion. So we know we've got the river, we've got Rhovanion as the area, and then the librarian Domi remembered Baranor after a bit of prompting, and remembered that he was particularly interested in ruins. And he kept asking questions about ruins and if there were records of ruins in that area. And with those three bits of information, we've got the Kingdom of Rhovanion, the river running, which gives us a kind of a line to work along, and ruins. Added in that Torwald then remembered a song, So Long Vel Bovni, about faded greatness. And combining all those things, we were like, we know where the next point on our quest is. And all of that is stuff, to go back to the very premise of our episode of how do you put existing Tolkien lore into action with players. All of that is the history of Tolkien, which you then gave us as effectively clues in this mystery. And then it took us to the next place, which was the ruins of Verbovni, which was a very different flavor of session.
Yes. So yeah, I wanted to be like, okay, these are ruins. What would happen to a long lost ruin? And we see ruins are often dangerous places, something that's been corrupted by shadow. They probably lived near the East Bight because that's where they seem to have had the most impact on the world. There was the Old Forest Road, which you guys have been very invested in. There's a lot of trade around there, so that would make a sense as a location. Another thing is the forest is changing. Forests don't just stay the same borders.
Yeah.
So I thought actually it probably would have been outside the forest, but very much easily these people all leave, die of plague and war. They would get engulfed by the forest again. And I think a really dangerous adventure, some ruins in Mirkwood Forest. There's something nasty going to be the spiders. There's going to be ruins. There might be like undead, ghosts, etc. And also, they all died in a great plague. So then I was like, Great Plague. Here's this monster from D&D, which is basically a plague troll. Is there poison? Is there disease there? What can I do with this as a sort of adventure hook? And so came up as an opportunity. And the details doesn't really matter for the history of Rhovanion in a game, but I found those as useful things to say that plague and disease, could that be part of the challenge, a struggle? Constitution sex, is there poison? What is going on there?
I just want to say also that one thing you've very consistently done throughout our entire campaign is make sure that every time we go into Mirkwood, it is properly terrifying.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, even when we were like, what are we, level 9 now? 8, 9? We haven't been leveling up very quickly.
No.
But even when we most recently went in there, we've done a lot and we've fought our way through Mount Gundabad. And then we were just back, and then we were back in Vale of Anduin. We were just going on a short 15-minute adventure, cracking down a ne'er-do-well. And we just had to do a little bit of passing through the Narrows, which is the bit, that is narrow because of the East Bight. Bad times.
Yeah.
But also, obviously, we know that Tolkien loved trees. That was one of his things. But the way that he characterizes trees is really interesting. And given what we know of the Old Forest and the way that the Old Forest behaves, it completely makes sense to me that the trees of Mirkwood, they might not want to go back into the East Bight because that's where so many of them were cut down. Maybe there's like a trauma there, but they would potentially, in a kind of natural, intelligent kind of way, be like, yeah, we're going to take over your city. We're going to grow here.
Yeah, it was really ominous when we visited Rhovanion, and it was this clearly you described like the ruins, or even a lot of it was just the foundations and the outlines of buildings, or where they would hummocks of earth and things, and then the forest had completely consumed it. It felt very ominous, but it had that thing which good fantasy literature does so well, which is a past. So when you see ruins and you see these things, you're like, oh, there's a whole other world and story has gone before, which I don't know if for you, James, at this point, you knew this was to do with the Kinstrife and Rhovanion, but I, as Josh, did not know much about this at all. So this was this big question mark for me. All I knew was that Baranor had been here for a reason, and it was a big drive to find out more.
I think it was only after we spoke to the NPC that we spoke to in the ruins,
yes.
not the plague troll, the other one, the spirit that dwelt.
Yes.
It was after that I, with my Tolkien brain, started putting two and two together.
So I've got my really detailed notes from these sessions. Once we defeated the troll, there was a lot of investigating. We knew there was a tomb somewhere here. We just didn't know how to get into it. So there was a good bit of lore mastering in terms of there was a challenge to try and find our way into the tomb, which made sense because the tomb, apart from Baranor recently, had lain undisturbed for a very long time. So it wasn't just like a door that we were like, oh, here we go, we'll take the well-trodden tourist path up to the mausoleum here. And we found our way in. And I presume the design of the tomb, Callum, for you was quite a blank canvas for this, because I actually have a description of it. And it's that, looking back and what we've talked about, is packed with lore. But at the time, I didn't see that. So what we've got is inside the tomb, there were statues carved into alcoves in an unusual style, which Halmir didn't recognize. It seemed reminiscent of Gondor, but Karhu, a Bjorning, who'd been in the campaign a long time, said it was also like the city of the Eothid in its style. So there you go. Already, you've linked in the Rohirric history there. We found footprints. We reckon the dust had been there for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but footprints were very recent. There were small specks of blood. Torvald, you saw friezes around the base of the plinth, which had horses. The plinth had running horses, and there were names of horses all the way around the outside, of which I've actually listed all of them. So Callum had done the lore work there. We then found statues set into the walls. You described those. They had similar expressions, but different body positions. It looked to be like four aspects of the same person. So there was a lot of mystery that you introduced here, which now that I know the history and I can see what we were talking about, it makes sense. But it was all just like question marks and alarms going off in my head. And that's when the spirit of the person buried here emerged, and we had this spectral encounter, which was really, really hard for Halmir.
Halmir had a rough time.
Halmir had a very rough time. He asked a question in terms of who are you and what brings you to the tomb. And I think I probably couldn't have had a worse answer to it. I think I approached it in a very like Halmir being a kind of lawful good, like he's a servant of the steward. At this point, he knew that Baranor's quest had been given by the steward. He was a member of the military. So I think he was asked, who are you and what brings you to the tomb? I can't remember my wording, but it was basically, I am a sworn soldier of the steward of Gondor. That's why I'm here. And this is when you introduced the conflict of the Kinstrife, because this spirit did not recognize the idea that Gondor was ruled this way, or why I was there, what I was there to do. And I think I got possessed. Or
I was like, it was like one of those things where like, you need to get to the next stage, you need to get the information. And I planned the adventure actually as you would have a check, you would succeed, you would have a conversation, you would get the information, you would move on. But I didn't know exactly how that would go down. And then when the interaction just didn't go like I expected, and I was like, it was much more, they wouldn't recognize this. How do they know to trust you? And I was like, working with Bert, one of the other players, had come up with a little bit of a backstory about a secret society that linked the people of Rhovanion, the north, the Eothid, the Rohan now, and Gondor. and some things that you might say. So essentially, this is something where it was like there was a right answer, and you just didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
But then I was like, actually, you need the information, but I could give that another way. So I think I was like, the spirit could possess you. Basically, I was like, this being has got unfinished business, and unfinished business in Tolkien's world is really bad.
Yeah.
That's why people's spirits don't move out, because there's something that needs to be done. And so it's like, why are they still here? There was some mission or quest that was enshrined to them. And so I was like, how can I get this information over in a sort of adversarial way? You got possessed, and then I was giving you information directly. Like you played the spirit, didn't you? I gave you
Yes.
the information about what their motivations were, and you were attacking the party and trying to defend it. And eventually all the other players managed to talk you down and then have a conversation about where you were going.
Yes, and what we learned, first of all, we learned that Baranor had achieved what Halmer couldn't, because he had used the family heirloom sword, Gilfalas, to fend off Mahari, who's the possessed, who's the spirit. And I think it was that ancient blade, the provenance of which we kind of knew was derived from the elves, but was very old, was enough to identify Baranor to the spirit as being like, oh, you're not just some ne'er-do latecomer to the situation. You understand the history. You carry this thing of great historical importance. And what we basically learned was during the kin strife, there were key artifacts that the king was worried about that would get taken and potentially not returned, but would be taken to Gondor. And to avoid that happening, the king had sent those artifacts further north to be kept hidden. That was our next breadcrumb, was that these artifacts, which we by this point were like, this is what Baranor's looking for, these artifacts. We don't know where they are, but he's searching for these. And we know they went north. And that was a really exciting moment, because what you basically given to us was, Baranor has been here. He's looking for artifacts linked to the Kingdom of Rhovanion, City of Earthed, the Northmen, the kin strife. And these artifacts historically were taken north, which meant Baranor had presumably headed even further north. And we had spent a lot of time in the north. And that's where we were going to be heading next. And there was a really special moment. I can't remember whose realization it was, but there was a realization in the party about where we were going.
Because, and this was really cool, it tied in with our early adventure to the city of the Ithia, where we had, after some lively debate between Torwald and Thudrik, ventured into the crypt, and which is where we discovered the ceiling map of the north, which included, I believe, the secret watchtower.
Yes.
And so, again, if I am taking lessons from this, it's the integration of lore and history of the world with the history of the campaign.
Yes.
It's a great example of building a mystery where the answer, or one of the answers at least, was something we found out in a completely unrelated situation on a completely unrelated quest.
Yeah.
Like dozens and dozens and dozens of sessions ago.
That was an awesome moment for me as a role master. And to be honest, what I think that the books are really good for is that they are like, here's this area, here's just like a crap load of stuff that you could use in it. You don't have to use it all, or you might want to use it all. And there's loads of stuff in the book that I never used. But what I did try to do was, you get a lot of rumors, there's a lot of mechanics around that. So to leave little like bits of like unturned little pieces of paper, like little clues. So that map, I was like, in the Rhovanion region guide, there's an amazing watchtower, and there's a load of lore about it. It was left when the last alliance marched east to watch over Gundabad. It was this part of the history of the region. And I was like, I really want to use this at some point, but I don't have a use for it right now. So what I'll do is I'll just draw this map, and I'll put the map, and I'll put that in it. And I did that at the time thinking, I don't know what this is for, but I might use it in the future. And that's an amazing way to give players stuff, because you can just be like, I'm going to build the world out without really knowing why. and then later on retcon it and be like, that was the plan all along. I planned this adventure, Josh's character, you hadn't yet made and hadn't made his backstory, hadn't done any of that at that point in the game. But obviously that links in, and like sometimes the things just click together. Because I guess it's what's it like? If you leave a thread unfinished, when it does connect up eventually, it can be really satisfying. So that was a really interesting moment for me, summarizing up that little bit there about Rhovanion and the Rhovanion part. The other things in the city I did was there's this language that Tolkien came up with, which is called Taliska, which James probably knows more about than me, but my understanding is it was sort of loosely based off Gothic Germanic languages and was meant to be the sort of language that the pre-men in Lord of the Rings spoke. Actually, if that language exists or ancient people, I'm going to use Taliska as an inspiration, and there's some words put in. So I was like, there's going to be inscription, how information can get across. So those are the sort of things that you could tie in this sort of Gothic theme, Taliska. Read it up about it on Tolkien Gateway. It's really interesting. And the links of Gondor. I wonder if maybe we should draw things to close there and then do another episode where we talk about what artifacts you could leave the tower, and then it segues into a Gundabad episode, Josh?
I think so, because what happened next on this quest, there were other, like Halmir's story was not the only one that was going on. So we would often do segments of Halmir's quest, and it would be like, oh, we're now heading this direction. Along the way, other characters would have quests. But the next part, the kind of going to that watchtower, when we picked that up, was a quest which has such huge momentum and time pressure. And I think it would be fun to probably start with the moment we decided, oh, we are now going to do this thing.
Yeah.
Such a fascinating moment, especially because it meant leaving behind one of our what you occasionally call the main character of the campaign.
I do often think of as the main character, and in my head that meant that the main story did not follow us to the tower, and therefore that what happened with the tower and Baranor and everything is like somehow some kind of side film or side series in my head.
Side mission to Gundabad.
Madness, Josh, for the record. Very much classic, at least amongst our player group style. We had a good idea that it was probably the tower, but Callum also had to lay down like 2 or 3 more pointers so that we would actually go and take the bait.
Yes.
I really wanted you to go to that tower, and you were very like close to not doing it. And I was like, I don't want a railroad, but just go here because it's awesome, and I've spent a long time prepping it. Please just go to the tower, which is fine, because I guess that's the prerogative of the lore master, isn't it? Rewarding the players for what you want them to do. I guess sometimes in Lord of the Rings, you're so embedded in the characters by this point, it became a little bit like you were making very sensible decisions. And I was like, no, just click, just press the button.
I guess in character, we knew he was heading there, but we didn't know if he had gotten there. Which is, as players, we might be like, of course he'll be there because that's the interesting place to be. But as I know, it's one of those interesting kind of like challenges of, do you as players do the interesting thing because it's interesting as players versus what makes sense for the characters to do.
So I think you're right. Let's tackle the tower and what happened after that as a separate episode, because that's a very specific bit of the plot. I think the Rhovanion episode and what happened in the Library of Mazrabul with this quest, the kind of detective work, I think is a great example of using the sort of richness of Tolkien's lore and using that as a basis for quests. Those things are not in the player's guide or the lore master's guide, but they gave you such sort of rich material to work with. And it meant, from my perspective, when I was the kind of the main character doing my bits of the quest, it was amazing. It felt so immersive. So I loved it. It felt like, it could have felt like doing a detective thing of trying to find someone, that you just gave us individual pieces of evidence, but that there was no other evidence. Like we only picked up. Whereas this felt like there was too much information for me to access, and I had to choose the bits that were important, like almost that the lore meant there was superfluous stuff, and I was trying to navigate through that, which was cool.
Yeah, that's what people need about, like, when you've got a player with really high perception or investigation. What is it that people can see stuff? So giving superfluous information. I guess that's the skill of the character, is to know what is important and what
Yes.
isn't, and skill. So you can almost present people a lot of information, and you read a book. It's not like you need a skill check to read a book. You can read the book. The skill check is to read the book and be like, what is the important detail within this lore? And that's what's great as a lore master, is you just say, all right, I don't need to make up this lore, because that would do me ages. I just have the lore, and then it's maybe like up to chance how much the lore is still present and known in the place that you're at, the NPC, etc. And then you as a player have to interpret that. And that is how you can use this in your game, is drop it in, snippets, little bits of information. Breadcrumbs.
One of my top GM tips would have to be, when you're trying to create a mystery, which is difficult to do successfully, but one of the ways to do it is, as Callum was saying, give your players too much information, some of which may not be entirely accurate.
Yeah,
I love it. We'll pick up next time, and maybe we'll talk a little bit there about the venture to the tower and how that segued into going to Gundabad and what sort of thing you might want to lead. Because I guess for me, it was like, I knew that Baron had gone north, and I knew that he was trying to get something. At the beginning of this, like writing it, I didn't know what he was going for, to be honest. And it came up later. You don't actually, in game, I don't think, actually know what it is yet, other than you found something.
We found a way to... The breadcrumb trail continues. We found a way to find more things, I believe. And what I believe we're talking about doing at the moment is having some kind of either sequel camp or mini campaign that follows up on this specific thread.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you, James, for joining us again. And thank you,
always a pleasure,
George, for existing. And
always a pleasure.
And thank you for listening, and we'll join you next time.
Or they'll join you.
No emails except on party business. And comments, suggestions, and questions to thefellowshipphase@gmail.com. The long year turns to its close. Much we have accomplished these last seasons. Our fellowship disbands, but is not broken, and we will return
on the next episode of The Fellowship Phase.